He's also worked with noted organizations like USAID, and now he's at the Qatar Computing Research Institute, and he's going to tell us some of the work he's been doing related to his book, Digital Humanitarians, and the use of drones and other kinds of technologies in disaster response. So thanks a lot, Patrick, for being here with us.
Thank you, Tufan. Thanks so much for having me, and thanks to Antti as well as the Development Impact Lab. Really, really great to be back on campus, because I was an exchange student here back in 1999, and I don't know why I ever left. So what a beautiful place to be and to study. So thanks again for the welcome and for hosting me. I, as Tufan rightly mentioned, just published a new book that looks at how technology and advanced computing is transforming the humanitarian space and beyond the humanitarian space as well. So unfortunately, we don't have all afternoon, so I can only give you a few teasers of the book, and would love to stay in touch with you. Anybody who wants to get in touch, I do reply to all emails. So even if it's a year or two from now and light bulb goes off and you have an opportunity to potentially do something related to what I've shared, please feel free to get in touch. Yeah. So why do digital humanitarians exist in the first place? Where do they come from? In many respects, it has to do with a climate change, a different kind of climate change, a change in the information landscape that humanitarian organizations, as well as others, all of us, are facing increasingly every day, right? Humanitarian organizations, for as long as they've been around until recent times, have been used to an information environment described by that first picture, basically a barren information landscape, which meant that when disaster struck, we wouldn't know who had been affected, how badly, where, and what to do about it for weeks. The information wasn't there, which meant a lot of guesswork in the humanitarian relief operations that were going on. That's not a criticism against humanitarian organizations. There's an information vacuum. What are you supposed to do? You do your best, right? So traditional humanitarian organizations are a product of this information climate on top here. Increasingly, however, they're facing a very different information landscape, one that's characterized by total information overload. And these humanitarian organizations are, frankly, completely unprepared and incapable of operating in an environment characterized by so-called big data. They are not data science organizations. They're not computing research institutes. They've never had to deal with anything other than information scarcity. And they've increasingly realized that this information overload, this big data that gets generated, meaning, for example, social media, could be text messages, mainstream media, satellite imagery, this overflow can be as paralyzing to their relief efforts as the absence of information. So they're in fact no better off in either of these two climates, right? It's problematic either way. And because they've struggled so much in making sense of this big crisis data, there's been a vacuum, there's been a gap, and that gap has been filled by digital humanitarians. And I'll say a bit more about them, of course, throughout my talk. The challenge, if you want to summarize it, for humanitarian organizations and others is akin to finding that proverbial needle in a giant haystack. And in our context, that needle represents informative, actionable pieces of information, potentially life-saving pieces of information that need to be found within this haystack. And the bad news is, if you need more bad news in terms of the challenge, it's not a static haystack. It's an information stack that explodes. And in fact, there's not just one stack. There are just hundreds of stacks that explode and grow very, very rapidly during major disasters. How in the world are these traditional dinosaur-type humanitarian organizations supposed to, right? It's almost unfair to expect them to be able to manage this big data challenge and find those needles, not 6 months after a disaster. That helps very few people, but more so in near real time. And that really requires a different set of skills. Now, it's been 5 years since the Haiti earthquake of January 2010. What this first generation of digital humanitarians did when they faced total data overload in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake is they basically crowdsourced the search for those needles, right? We got all our best friends and complete strangers from all around the world to basically rush that haystack and basically try and uncover and find the needles, which can be a lot of fun for a whole 2 minutes. Doing this, like we did in the aftermath of the Haiti earthquake for weeks on end, is the perfect recipe for total burnout. I mean, it's tedious, it's manual, it's anything but efficient. It's probably one of the worst ways you can, methodologies you can use for information management and so on. But nobody had really done anything like that before. We kind of were making it up as we went along, and we had volunteers, hundreds and hundreds of volunteers, and they basically, together with Humanitarians, rushed that haystack. This does not scale. It's not going to really work with 20 million tweets, which was the number of tweets that were generated during Hurricane Sandy in just a 5-day period, right? And okay, granted, even if you had, let's say you had 1 million best friends who were willing to basically sift through this haystack with you, is that really a good use of human time? I think I'd done some math a couple weeks ago, and it takes about 6 years for one person to read every single tweet and classify it. 6 years, 24/7, nonstop. Is that the best use of human time? I think last time I checked, our time on this planet is somewhat finite. So can we find other ways to augment basically crowdsourcing? And the answer is somewhat rhetorical. It's been 5 years since Haiti, and the sweet spot now is basically, yes, there are advantages of using crowdsourcing, but the sweet spot is crowdsourcing powered by artificial intelligence. And again, I don't know about you, but I've not met any humanitarian professional, whether it's the UN or the Red Cross, who's got a background in advanced computing and artificial intelligence, which is precisely why I moved to the Qatar Computing Research Institute, where there are folks with PhDs in this space. And I think that kind of collaboration between advanced computing research institutes and the social sector is really, really critical for the kind of innovation that's so desperately needed in this context. Now, this is almost all theoretical and conceptual and so on. Let me give you a real-world example. In fact, there's another unfortunate real-world example evolving right now in the Pacific. There's a high, not just a Category 5 cyclone, no, there's a high-end Category 5 cyclone that's headed to Vanuatu. And I just saw, I was mentioning to Tapan, or another colleague, a couple hours ago, I was watching the news, and a UN person was saying that they were recording wind gusts of over 300 kilometers an hour. And this is not an area where you've got necessarily the best building codes around and the best material for building houses. I mean, they're basically expecting the worst case scenario. So my team at QCRI and I and these digital humanitarians are starting to monitor social media and so on in very much the same way that I'm going to describe what we did a couple months ago in December during Typhoon Ruby in the Philippines, which was originally a Category 5, but then became a Category 4 and 3 hurricane. We partner directly with humanitarian organizations to help them make sense of big data. And we do this as well, obviously, with digital humanitarians, and I'll say a bit more about this. The reason I'm sharing this particular tweet is because of the contrast from 5 years ago. In fact, when I went to meetings at the UN in New York or in Geneva in 2008 and 2009, the best way to discredit myself in 5 seconds would be the word crowdsourcing. If I just brought up the idea, the possibility, maybe we could look into crowdsourcing, I mean, I'd be shown the door. Frankly, that was basically it. I mean, you'd be a laughingstock. So we've come a long way, right? And not only is the United Nations using crowdsourcing, but what we did during Typhoon, in the aftermath of Typhoon Ruby, was crowdsourcing powered by artificial intelligence. Right? I mean, the hashtag would probably be too long, crowdsourcing, but it was crowdsourcing powered by artificial intelligence. And what we did not have 5 years ago was the Digital Humanitarian Network, which was co-founded by the United Nations, give them a huge amount of credit for realizing that the world is definitely changing, and we are talking about information climate change. So they launched this in 2012, and what this is basically now serving as the official interface between established traditional humanitarian organizations, the big brick-and-mortar bureaucratic organizations who realize they can't do everything on their own, and dozens and dozens and dozens of tech-savvy, agile volunteers, technology groups from all around the world that literally occupy every time zone around the world. They're founding members from 3 years ago. They're triple the number now. And what happens then during disasters is the UN and other humanitarian organizations simply activate the Digital Humanitarian Network, and that the latter then provides the search capacity to these traditional humanitarian organizations to make sense of big data. They are the ones, the digital humanitarians are the ones using these so-called next-generation humanitarian technologies that combine crowdsourcing with artificial intelligence on behalf of these established organizations. The requests that basically the UN made to the DHN, the Digital Humanitarian Network, within hours before the typhoon made landfall was, okay, we'll need to look at all the tweets being generated, and we expect hundreds of thousands every day, at least, identify which of those tweets refer to urgent needs. So it is a bit of a needle in a haystack challenge. You're looking at hundreds and hundreds of thousands of tweets, and you're looking for those few tweets that perhaps show infrastructure damage, or rather urgent need and infrastructure damage. They also asked us to look through pictures posted on social media and find out which pictures showed infrastructure damage. All this, the whole purpose of this, was to accelerate the UN's disaster damage assessments, which comes first in disaster response. That's the first thing you need to do. You need to assess who's been affected, how badly, and where. So we deployed an experimental prototype platform, which is still very much experimental and prototype, called Micromappers, which is something being spearheaded by the Qatar Computing Research Institute, QCRI, where I work. It's free and open source, and it's a direct partnership, again, with the United Nations. So it's not a computing research lab in the middle of the Arabian Gulf and the UN in New York working separately. These are direct official collaborations, and that's why it works. We could not do this in isolation. The purpose of the Micromappers platform is to combine human computing, which is a fancy term for crowdsourcing, human computing with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, for a variety of different data types, not just text-based information, like tweets or text messages, mainstream media articles, but also pictures, like I mentioned, posted on social media, Instagram pictures, videos, YouTube videos that basically show footage of damage, and increasingly imagery. And that, I mean satellite imagery, orbiting satellite imagery, as well as UAV or drone, the non-lethal civilian version of drones that can also capture imagery. Here's an actual example from the deployment of the Micromappers platform. This is exactly what members, volunteers with the Digital Humanitarian Network, and others from all around the world would see when they went to the Micromappers platform. It's also available on the smartphone apps, which is very popular. They would see a tweet, so we'd automatically collect all the tweets being generated, push them to Micromappers, and volunteers would simply categorize the tweets. And these categories do not come from, we didn't pull that out of the hat. These categories come directly from the United Nations in New York, saying these are our information gaps. We need to know about urgent needs, population displacement, infrastructure damage. And this is what volunteers would do. So hundreds, thousands of volunteers crowdsourcing, looking at all these tweets. All fine and well until you start talking about potentially millions of tweets being generated within a 24-hour period or even a week. That, again, does not scale, which is why, combined with Micromappers, is a platform that QCRI has also been developing called AIDR, AIDR. It's also free and open source. And I want to stress that a lot of these next generation humanitarian technologies are very experimental. They don't always work as intended, at least not right away. It's a lot of learning by doing. We deploy these technologies, co-deploy these technologies with our humanitarian partners, and we do a lot of managing expectations, but our partners really realize this is R&D. It's a messy thing. There's nothing straightforward about research and development and experimentation. Our scientists are learning, our engineers are learning, the UN is learning, everybody's learning as we're doing this. And as long as we're transparent and honest about the fact that this is experimental, I think we're on safe grounds. But basically, AIDR, which stands for Artificial Intelligence for Disaster Response, is a real-time machine learning engine that sits behind Micromappers. And so as volunteers are tagging and categorizing these tweets, the algorithm starts learning. So for example, let's say maybe after 20 minutes, let's say 72 volunteers have tagged 72 tweets and said that these 72 tweets have to do with urgent needs, right? AIDR uses statistical machine learning to recognize the patterns, the similarities between these 72 tweets. And once it's learned enough, can automatically tag future tweets that are coming in. It'll immediately, once it gets an accuracy of 70% and higher, it'll say, okay, I think I've learned enough, I'm going to go out now and I'm going to go collect the tweets myself and tag them myself. And we've done some stress testing that shows that we could tag and classify about 2 million tweets an hour, which is right now overkill for disaster response, but probably not for much longer. And so this is, I think, one of the ways to win the big data battle during disasters, is you crowdsource the training of machines. It's not machines and humans on the other end. It's basically a hybrid, combined approach between human computing and machine computing. And we think this is a sweet spot that's necessary to scale and make sense of big data. Of course, most people are not on Twitter, right? Especially a lot of you who are working the ICT for development space. There are all kinds of issues with social media and the bias and discrimination and so on, which are very, very valid, which is why we've got an official partnership with UNICEF. They've got a phenomenal SMS-based project in 12 different countries around the world, which they're expanding to more countries this year. And they're receiving in any of these countries anywhere between tens of thousands of text messages a week to hundreds of thousands of text messages a month. And they are struggling. They don't have the staff, the funding to basically take 100 people, put them behind computers, and have them read hundreds of thousands of text messages. And again, would that even be the best use of human time, right? So we basically modified the AIDR platform, we're calling it AIDR SMS, to enable UNICEF to automatically classify incoming text messages in real time. And again, up to about 2 million per hour, which is way more than they need right now. And they're field testing this this month in Zambia. Their project there is a public health related project. They're getting tons of SMSs having to do with public health. We were just on a call with the World Food Program that is sitting on many, many, many text messages from the Ebola crisis, and also quite keen on if they can avoid having to spend 3 months reading the text messages, would rather find a way to help them along and accelerate that effort. It's experimental. I can't guarantee any of you or our humanitarian partners that this will work flawlessly. It's part of, in my opinion, the beauty of experimental research and the luxury that we have at QCRI of experimenting and at the same time generating some really, really neat scientific research to contribute to the scientific literature and expand, basically share and disseminate what we're learning with the rest of the scientific community. I mentioned images as well, pictures posted on social media. Same idea. This is exactly what you'd see as a digital humanitarian. Pictures scraped automatically from Twitter. All you do is you rate the level of damage that you see in a picture. It is single-click activism par excellence, and it works, right? It actually works. You're directly informing relief operations on the ground and improving the situational awareness of relief workers on the ground by simply clicking on pictures. So if you can click like on a Facebook picture, you can be a digital humanitarian. It's really as simple as it is. And each of these pictures are shown to at least 5 different volunteers. Why do we do that? For data quality control purposes. So only when there's overall consensus that this particular picture shows severe damage do we take that picture and map it. And that whole mapping process, by the way, is super important. Telling the UN that this picture shows infrastructure damage, but you don't know where in the Philippines that is a waste of time. In order for these needles, if you'd like, to be actionable, they need to be put on a map. They need to be geo-referenced, right? We also do this kind of triangulation with tweets. We show every tweet to 5 different volunteers. If there's overwhelming consensus, it goes and trains the algorithm, right? We need that kind of level of triangulation. And of course, if you're sitting on tens of thousands of pictures, in fact, there were tens of thousands of pictures posted during Hurricane Sandy, even more Instagram pictures. There were 1.3 million Instagram pictures over a week or two. Unless you have many friends who are willing to help out, you're out of luck. So we're working with a startup at Stanford who've done some really great innovative work around automatic image classification. And I actually met with them yesterday afternoon, and I'm really excited. They're trying to manage my expectations, but I'm really excited about the potential of basically creating machine learning classifiers to automatically identify whether a picture has infrastructure damage or not, right? That would be an amazing advance in our ability to do this rapid damage assessment. Even just saying damage, no damage would be phenomenal. Basically doing that first, automatically, and then all the damage-related pictures go to the Micromappers platform, and then the digital humanitarians rate the level of damage. So I'm excited about this. And like I said, it all ends up on a map. This was a Twitter crisis map for Typhoon Ruby that basically provided humanitarians with a very quick and dirty picture of what the situation potentially was like. And again, I guess keywords is quick and dirty. The United Nations definition of a rapid assessment is a 2-week assessment, is a 14-day assessment. Now, that's not a criticism at all against about my humanitarian colleagues. They have to do this on the ground. It's field surveys. That takes a lot of time, and accessing some of these disaster areas with the kind of debris that happens after a Category 5 typhoon is not easy at all, right? At the same time, they obviously recognize that 2 weeks is a long time, and they would rather have a very quick and dirty initial assessment within the first 12 to 24 hours. And because of the nature of social media being real time and eyewitnesses on the ground, they are very interested in leveraging that and basically extracting meaningful information from social media using micromappers. So that's a story on one potential way of finding those needles, right, in the haystack. There are a number of problems, and I only have time to really look at one of them, but that doesn't mean that I'm not aware that there are others, and we certainly don't have the answers to most of the challenges. But one of the challenges, and I'm sure you're aware of this, is you probably can't believe everything that you see on social media, right? And this is also true of mainstream media, so no double standards, right? But what are we going to do about this problem? If there's misinformation, if there's disinformation, if there's rumors, they're taken as facts or as reality, as credible, and that feeds into the disaster damage assessments and so on. That can be really, really problematic. And in one part of my book, I actually go into a real story in Chile after the earthquake in 2010, where that had actually very negative repercussions. There was misinformation, disinformation, and it's not insignificant in terms of the problems that this can cause. So what are we going to do about verification? Red balloons may be part of the solution. And before I go on, has anybody heard of the red balloon challenge? Oh, good. So, and if you have, you're not allowed to cheat and answer the question. So the red balloon challenge was a massive crowdsourcing challenge back in 2009 that DARPA set up. And what they did is they took 10 red weather balloons, and one of them is actually here, a picture of one of the 10, so you have a good idea what it looks like. And they discreetly placed these 10 red weather balloons across the continental United States, right? So we are talking about, I think, 3 to 4 million square miles of space. So talk about a needle in the haystack challenge. You're looking for 10 of these across the continental US. Good luck, right? And what DARPA did was saying, okay, we will give the winning person or team, $40,000 cash prize. For finding it first, for finding those 10 accurate locations first. So just venture a guess here. Let's say, how many weeks do you think it took for the winning team to find these 10 needles in a continental-sized haystack? And I guess just to start, maybe let's say 3 weeks. Does anybody dare to say less than 3 weeks? No? 2 weeks. All right. Do I hear less than 2 weeks? No? 2 weeks to find 10 needles? Okay. So basically, drum roll please, a whole 8 hours and 44 minutes. And the winning team, of course from MIT, which is getting old by now, did this without leaving their laptops. They basically used crowdsourcing to search for the red balloons. And they did this in less than 9 hours. And the chap who spearheaded the team at MIT is actually a good friend of mine, Riley Crane, and I still remember as if it were last week. I met up with him at MIT and I said, Riley, way to go, this is insane. I mean, this is just incredible. And I still remember the first thing he said back to me was, actually, the reason it took us that long was because other teams from other universities were planting fake pictures of balloons online to try and basically throw other teams off. So despite that disinformation, they were still able to use crowdsourcing to circumvent the false information and find the accurate location. It told me it took a couple extra hours to do the verification to make sure that they really had the accurate location. That's a phenomenal example of what's possible with this kind of methodology, and they use something called time-critical mobilization or time-critical crowdsourcing. But in essence, what this says is it's possible to find eyewitnesses that happen to be standing right next to the needle. Right? It is possible to do that for an entire continent in 8 hours and 44 minutes. And we know that disasters are not, thankfully, yet continent-wide. They're very geographically specific, right? So this is a great example of an accident that's very, very specific, right? Paris a couple of years ago, a train crash outside of Paris, and this eyewitness basically goes on Instagram, takes a picture and says, hey, this is just 20 meters from my home. He was probably just looking outside the window and took that snapshot, right? We are increasingly eyewitnesses, digital eyewitnesses, human sensors all around the world, and we can bear witness to events large and small. And you can see the BBC is all over it. right? They're getting in touch with these eyewitnesses and say, hey, can we use your picture? And most of the time they're hoping to get the picture for free, and they can break a story, and they have the image, they get the traffic, the news traffic, right? So what if we use this incredible approach to time-critical mobilization to find eyewitnesses to verify information in much larger disasters? We don't focus on the micro, relatively speaking, crises, but on really the Category 5 disasters around the world. And one of them, as you know, is Hurricane Sandy, which was one of the most powerful hurricanes in recorded human history. You may have seen the footage on CNN at the time, right, of the incredible surge in the water, oceans. Okay, I'm hearing no laughing, and I'm really worried. This is not true, right? Okay, good, you're here. Hollywood blockbuster, Day After Tomorrow, right? Yes, okay, phew. All right, not real. So, but this was being shared on social media during disasters. Rumors, misinformation, and so on. Now, you don't need a PhD in computer science from QCRI to tell you that this picture is also not authentic. Right? You don't need that. You look at it, great, nice superheroes and characters. But if you'd seen this picture first, would that give you pause? It certainly gave me pause when Hurricane Sandy was going on and I was looking at social media and looking at the pictures and videos, like, sure, plausible, I don't know. What was interesting during Hurricane Sandy, and has been happening in other disasters before and since, is there were two individuals in the case of Hurricane Sandy that basically decided to take it upon themselves to verify pictures and videos. They just decided they wanted to do that. One of them was a journalist, the other was a graphics expert. They never collaborated. They were doing this entirely independently. They set up a website independently and started verifying images and videos. But they did more than that. They didn't just say fake, real, whatever. They also explained why. They explained the process they took to determine the authenticity or the lack thereof of these different multimedia reports being shared, these different rumors being shared on social media. And they shared that with the rest of the world. Now, we've seen the power of the crowd with respect to the Red Balloon Challenge. And the Red Balloon Challenge was not even a disaster, right? There are no emotions really attached to wanting to help others in need with the Red Balloon Challenge. But we've seen how powerful the crowd can be in good ways, as well as some bad ways, which is another story. Why not go beyond just two individuals? Why not? What could you do if you had 1 billion people available as eyewitnesses and digital detectives? We know from the Kevin Bacon 6 degrees of separation, any one of us are only separated by at least 6 hops, or at most rather 6 hops. On social media, friendship ties on Facebook, that degree of separation is closer to 4. And I don't think it's static either. I think that's basically a number that's moving. And that's for the whole globe. Right? In a city, which by definition has a lot more socially dense ties, chances are you and I are only 1 or 2 persons removed from an eyewitness to a car accident near Stanford right now. And we've shown with the Red Balloon Challenge that we could potentially find that person, not in 8 hours and 44 minutes, because we're not talking about the continental US, but maybe in 8 minutes and 44 seconds, by using the same kind of methodology that MIT has basically been developing. To put this to the test and bring it to the disaster response space, my colleagues and I at QCRI with some partners have launched a new form, a new type of a detective agency that we're calling the Verily Detective Agency for digital detectives. It's going to take a new type of digital humanitarian to help and verify information during disasters. And the way that Verily works is with our Verily platform, which looks exactly like this. This was from a couple months ago, a deployment of the Verily platform that was requested by the BBC. They were basically sitting on this picture, and they needed to know whether this picture had been taken in Syria or not. Now, Verily, our team and so on and partners focus mostly on natural hazards. We don't want to do conflict zones because that is a whole other can of worms. But in this particular case, there was no graphic, psychologically hard things to see in this image, right? It's just a landscape. So we figured, okay, sure, why not? And I should mention that one of the team members from the MIT winning team is working with us on this project at the Masdar Institute. So we are very much closely tied with the folks at MIT on this. And the Verily platform works in a very straightforward, simple way. We don't have $40,000 to give out. That's the first thing, first of all. But we've also already seen the altruism. People want to help. The crowd wants to help. And if you can channel that goodwill in a way that keeps your integrity and is ethical and so on, you can do a lot of good. And the way that the platform, Verily, the digital detective agency, gets activated is through a verification request, a yes or no question. And that's really, really important, that the verification question be a yes or no question. And then what happens is we use the same methodology as MIT's, and we basically rapidly crowdsource the search for eyewitnesses, and we rapidly crowdsource the recruitment of digital detectives. And you'll see here, as we're crowdsourcing a response for the Verily platform, it's not just about dig up, dig down, right? And we saw the fiasco that happened during the Boston Marathon bombings in 2013 on Reddit, where there was this witch hunt, which completely misled. I mean, it was out of control. That's a design issue for us. What we've done is we've deliberately designed the Verily platform to hopefully encourage critical thinking, which is really a core part of what we want to do with Verily. Not only are we looking to crowdsource the search for eyewitnesses, to crowdsource the recruitment of digital detectives who may have the skills to verify this content, we really want to crowdsource critical thinking. We don't want to see more of this mindless retweeting of rumors in the middle of disasters, which helps absolutely no one. So we want to basically educate and help the generation of a more informed online public sphere, a more accountable and effective online public sphere. So this is really important. The volunteers, digital detectives, eyewitnesses have to explain why they think their evidence is authentic and answers the verification question. In this particular deployment, the wisdom of the crowd wins again. This picture was in fact not taken in Syria, but in Malta instead. Now, what if you're a new digital detective, or you want to be a digital detective, but you don't have the skills? We don't expect people to automatically have these skills, which is the problem anyway in the online public spheres. People are not thinking critically or don't know how to verify content, which is where the little handy help button there comes in, right? What we've done is we've partnered with the editors of this phenomenal handbook written by the world's leading experts on verification, from seasoned investigative journalists to human rights practitioners and so on, who basically shared with the rest of the world, this is what the state of the art is. This is what we do at the BBC to verify user-generated content. We've taken the incredible gems in this handbook, and we've basically converted them into mini modules, mini sort of teach yourself little modules. So if you're a new digital detective and you're going to Verily and you want to help out, and there's a picture that needs to be verified, you just go to the help function, you go to how to verify a picture, and in 3 minutes, you know as much as the experts at the BBC and at Human Rights Watch know. You can be a digital detective. So I realize, how much time do I have left, out of curiosity? 20? Okay. I want to have some Q&A. So just another 5 minutes, I'll close up with that. We've talked a lot about social media and user-generated content. I want to give you a whole other sort of data source, right? Now, satellites have been playing an instrumental role in remote sensing. Satellite imagery has played an instrumental role in disaster response for almost 2 decades now. It's really, really key. At the same time, like any other technology, data collection technology, there are some advantages and constraints with respect to satellite imagery. One example is that after Typhoon Haiyan in 2013, it took 64 hours to task the satellites, to collect the imagery, process the imagery, analyze the imagery, and then share it with humanitarians on the ground in the Philippines. And 64 hours is not okay. It's way, way too long, right? Humanitarian organizations do not have the luxury of time. And actually, more importantly, disaster-affected communities don't have the luxury of time, right? Time is not on their hands. So we can do better. And one thing to keep in mind in terms of other challenges with respect to satellite imagery, it's also very expensive. And the satellites themselves, have a cool little price tag of about $300 million. And that's not even to get it up in space. That's just a satellite, right? Another $100 million to operate it and maintain it. And then you have a drone, which is not what you might think a drone is, but this is a drone. It's a UAV. It's a fixed-wing UAV. And the price tag on this one is $60. And it actually flies. Last week, some colleagues in Ghana built this particular quadcopter, again, another drone, out of recycled pieces that they found, and they hacked it together, and it flies. That cannot be more than $60 either. So we're not talking about $300 million worth of equipment to basically capture the bird's eye view. So this is Ghana. How about to Guyana, where there's some serious issues around illegal deforestation in Guyana. So what's the story there with drones? Well, the very first indigenous community to have built their own drone to basically survey their area and document the illegal deforestation is this community, this indigenous community called the Wapichanas in Guyana. And together with Digital Democracy, a phenomenal NGO based here in San Francisco, who had never built a drone themselves. They just took a bunch of pieces, lots of glue, some tape, and lots of other pieces, spare parts, and they just went down to Guyana. They've been collaborating with this group of indigenous communities for a few years now, and they built the drone together. It was really a community-centered approach to building this particular UAV. And one of my favorite stories from this, which just happened a few months ago, was at one point the mount for the motor broke. And here you are, you're in the middle of the forest, and you're not going to go to Home Depot to find the little piece that could, fix that. So the Wapichanas basically went all over their village looking for different types of plastic that might, be the solution to this. And they ended up finding a part of a beer crate that they were able to fasten and basically replace the broken mount for the motor, and it flew. And that's an incredible story for me because I think that's the point where, this technology no longer becomes a foreign, mysterious, external technology. It becomes a technology you can hack, you can change, you can mold to use for your own purposes. And I think that's really, really impressive. And this was some footage, rather the imagery that they developed, put together after their first pilot, not too far from where they live. So you can create the 3D models of the imagery that you've collected. And local communities are not the only ones who are using aerial imagery. I had been seconded to the United Nations during Typhoon Haiyan, and thankfully got permission from QCRI to do that for about 2 weeks. And I was really struck by the number of UAV projects that were ongoing. I mean, that was unprecedented. In Haiti, there was one, and that was it. 5 years later, there are a dozen. And obviously, that imagery is available not 64 hours later. It's available on site within a few hours of flying the UAVs. Provides far higher resolution and a lot more cost effective. So what we did at QCRI is we launched the Humanitarian Uav Network, UAviators, which has since been endorsed by the United Nations, that also sits on the board along with the World Bank, the European Commission, the Red Cross, and others. And I'll say a bit more about what we're doing at QCRI to support this space. But just to say that it's not a hypothetical. Humanitarian organizations like UNOCHA are already experimenting with UAVs. It's not a maybe sometime in the future scenario. It's happening now. At the same time, humanitarian organizations are desperately overstretched. They're underfunded, and they can't be everywhere at the same time, which is why we launched at QCRI this crowdsourced crisis map of aerial pictures and videos of disaster zones generated by professional drone pilots, by members of the public. So just like humanitarian organizations are leveraging social media, sort of traditional social media, the earth-based social media, they're increasingly turning to this idea of aerial social media, user-generated content that's posted on social media, on YouTube. There are numbers of videos on YouTube that people post of flights that they've done over disaster zones. And that way, these UAV pilots can extend the eyes and ears, in a way, of humanitarian organizations and extend them from the bird's eye view, which obviously comes with a whole host of challenges, right? Somebody who buys a quadcopter last week and then decides to be a hero in a disaster the next day is a very, very bad idea, which is why there's an ulterior motive to this map, is we use this map to expose members of the public to a code of conduct on the do's and don'ts, right? The solution here is never going to be only technology. You have to have guidelines. You have to have codes of conduct. So humanitarian professionals and drone experts and so on have come together to basically draft this code of conduct that basically is being used to hopefully make members of the public part of the solution rather than part of the problem. Anyways, you can go to this map. It's live. It gives you bird's eye views of various disasters around the world. Now, when I was meeting with the CTO that's Chief Technology Officer of FEMA, a while back, and this is last year, he was already telling me, listen, aerial imagery is going to become a big data challenge. It's going to happen. I mean, there's already been over 1 million of these DJI Phantom quadcopters sold. It's inevitable. So what we did is we continued working with the United Nations, and we've extended the Micromappers platform to also analyze aerial imagery, as well as satellite imagery. At this point, it's just remote sensing. It's imagery, right? And because what we do with Micromappers is we combine human computing with machine computing, we're taking that same approach. So for example, let's say we need to do a damage assessment, and we invite digital humanitarians to trace buildings that have been damaged or buildings that have no more roofs. What we want to do then is we want to develop an artificial intelligence engine, just like AIDR, that's learning. As AIDR is learning with text messages and tweets, we want an extension of AIDR to be able to learn and recognize, I see what they're getting at. They're looking for damage, and damage looks like this, so I'm going to go and find more of that. So there's definitely the AI component to this as well. And we've got collaborations with a number of next generation commercial satellite companies that we're very excited about and will give us access to some really, truly unique imagery in the very near future. Now, with humanitarian technology, you don't necessarily want to deploy untested technology in the middle of a disaster. At the same time, you don't always have the luxury, right? I mean, this is the nature of next generation humanitarian technology and R&D. You basically learn by doing, and you try things out, and sometimes it works and it doesn't. In the case of this particular extension of Micromappers, we had the opportunity to deploy the platform in a non-sudden onset major emergency. We collaborated with a wildlife reserve in Namibia who had worked with some of my friends to basically capture aerial images of their wildlife reserve because they wanted to do better wildlife conservation, wildlife monitoring. There's a huge rhino poaching issue in Namibia, as there is across southern Africa. And here they were, when I got in touch with them, these two rangers were sitting on about 25,000 aerial images of their vast wildlife reserve that they were trying to protect. And they were a week into this. They'd gone through a few hundred pictures. And these are folks who actually, need to be out in the bush protecting the animals, not behind a bloody computer looking at these pictures, right? And so when I got wind of this, light bulb went off and I said, hey, stop everything you're doing. We need to test our Micromappers platform. Give us the imagery. We'll push it to Micromappers. We'll get digital humanitarians, in this case, digital something else, to look at the images. And lo and behold, it took the crowd less than 24 hours to go through all 25,000 images. It would have taken the rangers months. That's what they told us themselves. It would have taken us a month. You pull this off basically on a Saturday afternoon, right? And it was phenomenal, the response from the crowd. We had middle schools and high schools across the US. We had retired grandparents in the UK and everything in between. People loved the idea of looking for animals. And then what we did is we collaborated with EPFL, the Polytechnic University in Lausanne, Switzerland. They took all the traces, and we're in the process of publishing these results, so it's not public yet, but we're very excited to announce that we can now automatically identify gazelles in this imagery, which is probably not going to be very helpful for disasters, but it's a proof of concept. If we can do this for gazelles, hopefully we can do this for disaster damage as well. And one of my favorite results of this digital wildlife expedition into Namibia was when one of the rangers who was looking at all the results, as I said, they spent about a week looking at the initial images. And in one of the images, the crowd had found animals that the ranger had not seen. The crowd. I mean, these are kids, middle school, who maybe gone to the zoo once or twice, right? And these are rangers who've been spending decades in the wildlife, and they didn't even see the animals in the aerial imagery, but the crowd actually saw it. So, yay crowd. So where are we going with Micromappers as an example of a potential next generation humanitarian technology? Data integration is going to be huge. That's a trend that we're headed towards for disaster responses. Now taking all this imagery, all this data, using machine computing and human computing to filter through and create one map with multiple layers, because we've seen some peer-reviewed papers recently that have shown just how enriching having multiple layers is for triangulation purposes and situational awareness. And of course, sensors. That's really the next big thing with Internet of Things, and so on. I'll close with this slide, or a couple slides. Remember the map, right? It's easy to forget that there are real people behind that. These are not just dots on a map. These are people who've been affected by a major disaster on the ground, right? It's important not to lose that humanity of it all when we get excited about the technology and so on. It's also important to remember that those dots there would be no dots on this map if people didn't care in the first place. If people didn't want to help others in need and use these technologies to help others in need, there would simply be no dot on that map. So it's really important to remember the countless number of digital humanitarian volunteers from all around the world who offer their own time for free to help in need. So that's my story on digital humanitarians. At least it's 5% of the story. Digital humanitarians have been called digital Jedis by the United Nations, a term I wholeheartedly agree with. So I hope you're asking yourself, how do I become a digital Jedi? Well, one way is to join. You can already be a digital Jedi by joining micromappers and looking through the imagery. You can use ADA, you can become a digital detective, and a lot more as you'll find in my book in Digital Humanitarians, humanitarians.com. I haven't had really time to talk about the next generation satellite imagery, satellite technology projects that are going on in the digital humanitarian space. Super, super exciting stuff. I haven't talked about something else that's incredibly important, is what happens if you're a digital humanitarian and you live in a country under repressive rule. What happens when you're a young Iranian in Tehran and there's a double earthquake that strikes north of the country? Or if you're in China and you've got an earthquake in Sichuan province? Or if you're a Russian in Moscow and there are massive forest fires that basically Vladimir Putin is doing his best to cover up. Those are incredible heroes in my mind, and I've shared their stories as well in the book, and they're just incredible, incredible people. I have a lot of respect for them. So if you read the book, a couple other teasers, you'll find out why spam filters are important for disaster response. You'll find out about the very first example of crowd espionage, where members of the crowd didn't even realize they were spying. Hugely problematic, to say the least. You'll find out why Vladimir Putin was seriously ticked off by these people in Moscow. And you'll find out why massive multiplier online games may actually be the future of digital humanitarian response. Thank you very much for your patience. Thank you. I'd love to take questions if there's time, if anybody wants to stick around. Sure. In the back first.
Yeah, so I have two questions.
Yeah.
They're very different. One is, so especially in the case of like domestic disasters, people are kind of like sensational pictures are going to be more common than like not. And so how do you normalize for like this problem that if you have one house that looks terrible, everybody's going to tweet it, and so it looks like it's a bigger problem than it is. And then the other one is, so I come from a CS background.
From where, sorry?
The computer science.
Oh, great, okay.
So I'm just curious about like if you could comment a little bit. It looks like in your paper you're using like a bad words approach with a typical classifier, like an SVM.
That's going to be over my head, but yes.
Oh, okay. I was hoping you could comment on the AI.
Sure. So, I mean, on the first question, that's a challenge. It is, the reason it is looking for needles in the haystack is that the vast majority, 99% of the information that gets generated during disasters tends to be not relevant or informative or actionable. So you really are looking for those just few little pieces of information, which makes it hard, which is why we need computer scientists to be involved in humanitarian response. And the same way with Verily, we're trying to basically educate the broader public on how to be responsible social media users during disasters, and not just to retweet a picture that's been mindlessly retweeted 100 times over. It's an educational challenge. That's not a technology, something that technology on its own I don't think will solve, but it really requires awareness raising, education, and changing behaviors, which is much harder than developing an algorithm, I think. But it needs to happen. It can't just be technology that we're throwing at the problem. It has to be that educational component, I think. Does that more or less answer?
Yeah, I guess the question was, maybe the answer is no, but it was, do you currently normalize for the fact that like you have a bias and that sensational images will be more popular? Not just everybody will retreat, but everybody will like.
I mean, we definitely expect that. We take everything that's generated and then we try and filter, and obviously it's not representative. I think everybody in the humanitarian space, as well as us in the computer science space, know that you're getting a very biased, skewed view of what's happening. But a destroyed bridge is still a destroyed bridge at that particular location, and that's still valuable to humanitarians. I hope I've answered your question, but I'm not convinced I have. So find me or email me, and I can send you extra papers on. I'm a wannabe computer scientist. I come from the humanitarian space, and my colleagues are the ones who know how to do all this kind of magical stuff. And I think they've done a couple of peer-reviewed papers that they've published. Hopefully, okay, I'll connect you directly with Imran, and he'll answer all your questions. We had another one here first, and then there and there. Okay.
So I work with the Human Rights Center at Berkeley Law.
Sure.
And we're just starting a technology and human rights program. And that made me wonder, you said you don't work in conflict zones, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about why. I know you have some reasons.
Why we do or do not work in conflict zones?
Yeah, I think you said you're focusing on disasters.
Yes, well.
But not in conflict zones.
So I originally come from the conflict prevention, conflict early warning space, and during the Arab Spring it was very clear that the use of the humanitarian technologies in conflict zones could really backfire. I mean, we're talking about, it's one thing to have personal identifying information out during the Oklahoma tornadoes. It's quite another thing to have personal identifying information out in Khartoum during the Arab Spring or in Syria. It's a lot dicier. And I think as digital humanitarians, we're not necessarily the world's leading experts in cybersecurity and data protection and data security either. I mean, things can change and get very ugly very quickly in these kinds of contexts. I mean, you'll see from the book, one of the stories is about the Libya Crisis Map, where we did this work with the United Nations and so on, and that seemed to have averted any major disastrous consequences. But it's incredibly stressful. I mean, this stuff would definitely keep me up at night when we were doing work in conflict zones. So I decided, take a few steps back, because there's all kinds of unintended consequences that can happen in conflict zones with these technologies. It's still very early on. We're all learning, but I'd rather not learn by doing in a conflict zone, if at all possible. Now, at the same time, about 70% of humanitarian crises have a conflict violence angle to them. We can't ignore 70% of humanitarian crises because of the violent angle, the violent component of these crises. So I have, over the past year, started to revisit, how do we do this responsibly in conflict zones? What are the guidelines and the codes of conduct that need to be put in place, and the safeguards that need to be put in place, and to ensure that we uphold the principle of do no harm. And it's because I didn't think we could uphold the principle of do no harm back in 2011 that I stepped away, and others are stepping away still now. A couple of colleagues of mine have said, there are bad things happening and we didn't intend it, and we don't want to be responsible anymore. So it's tricky. I didn't show, one of my favorite stories is with the Syria Airlift project, which you may or may not, you actually shouldn't not necessarily have heard of it, using UAVs to basically transport medical equipment and food and water, working directly with Syrian refugees on the Turkish side of the border, and taking a swarming model, swarmifying the flight plans and making them quasi-random so that they can't really be shot down. And they've done the math, and they're actually doing a pilot in Sacramento in a couple of weeks with Syrian refugees here. And within 8 hours, you could deliver about 200, 300 kilos worth of goods within just a couple miles. And sometimes that's all you need for some of these villages that are under siege, right? The Assad regime has been waging a campaign of surrender or starve. So it really is an issue of providing airlift support. And they're doing this very responsibly. They're really working directly with local communities, with Syrian scientists and engineers, and they're not dictating how it goes. They're learning from them. So that's an area that I'm advising the initiative. So I'm looking now at how we can overcome some of these challenges. Okay, we've got two more. Yeah.
Cool. Really cool. I like it. So I work in design thinking and international development.
Oh, nice.
So a lot of the conversations we try to pose is not what is the problem to be solved, how do we solve the problem, but what is the problem to be solved. And when it comes to a lot of crisis management with exogenous problems occurring in a particular place, that problem, although there are many, it's one of those, hey, these are definitely things that we should focus on, which is why such work makes so much sense in that regard. But though some of the work that I try to do tries to do the same type of thing, getting qualitative data out, but with issue areas of which there are different problems, whether or not it's ICT for maternal health or
Sure.
water and sanitation, and a lot of other international development people work in that.
Right.
So with this platform that's being developed, what do you see as ways that this can help the places that aren't crisis issues?
Right. I'm so glad you asked that question. Thank you very much, because I haven't been involved as much as I'd like to be in the ICT for development space, and I was hoping you could help me answer that question, to share with you some of these technologies that are being developed initially for sudden onset disasters, but now we're spinning it off for wildlife conservation. In fact, some archaeologists want to use micromappers as well this summer in Jordan. So clearly the technologies can perhaps support other social good sectors, and I'd love to find out whether there's an opportunity to collaborate with any of you here, to do a small pilot and see, if this could add meaningful, value to the work that you're doing and the folks you're interacting with. Hey, that would make me a very happy camper. So, and it's all free and open source. So I don't have an immediate answer, but I'd love to. Let's please stay in touch. Okay, awesome. So obviously completely lost all my business cards over the past 24 hours. But if you go to digital-humanitarians.com, or you just Google the name of the book and just click on contact, I'll reply. No, sorry, thank you. Did you have a
Yeah, I have a similar question about whether you can extrapolate your work to more long-term development projects other than immediate humanitarian aid. So one of the projects I'm involved in right now is to give block grants to
what, sorry?
Provide block grants
to
communities or villages in Myanmar, and have villages come up with their own need assessment and their own infrastructure projects or social services project to reduce poverty in their own community. So in that case, I was wondering, whether there's a digital platform where people can get together or come up with good ideas, or what are the most emergent needs in their communities, and if they decide to do something, whether they can crowdsource ideas from outside.
Yeah.
These are people who are limited in resources, financial resources,
Sure.
or technology.
Right.
So even though they want to build a road, there will be lack of knowledge. Yeah. So I was curious.
That's a really good. I don't think I have an answer. I don't have answers for most questions, but there is a team at UCL, the University College of London. They have an extreme citizen science lab, which is, I think, trying to do this kind of work, really working in the most disconnected areas where technology simply cannot be assumed, period, and still looking at ways from a design perspective to enable these local communities to be participants and to basically self-organize and decide for themselves what they want to do. So I have a good contact there if you want to contact me, and then I'll connect you with the professor who's spearheading that. They've done some really great work recently in Congo, Brazzaville, with some communities. That might be an answer, it might not, but that's what comes to mind right now. Was there another question here first, or there was one more there?
Okay, maybe one last question, because we're a little bit over one.
Sorry.
But no, that's okay. And on Berkeley time.
On Berkeley time, got it.
I was actually going to ask pretty much the same question that they were going to ask, but I was listening to your questions, and a good resource you might want to look into is OpenIDEO.
Yeah.
It's infancy, but that could be a resource. But I would imagine, I also work in the development sector, that this would be really valuable because you don't have necessarily the same time constraints as you would in crisis response.
Yeah.
And I was going to ask whether or not you're doing that yet and how your strategy differed, but I guess that's an ever-evolving thing, something you haven't quite determined yet, but I would be interested to keep in touch about the process.
Of deciding how we use the technologies?
How you use it, how the use of the technology would differ from competitive and remedial challenges.
That's a good question, and I'd be happy to experiment. Again, with the caveat that these platforms are experimental prototypes, and so things break. And sometimes more often than we'd like at the worst times possible. So as long as I've managed expectations, it is free and open source. If you want to try it out in a particular context or a pilot project and so on, give you the code and be patient with the bugs, and we'd love to learn with you. I mean, that's what it's all about. Yeah. Thank you. Good. Thank you very much. Thanks so much. Thanks again. Thank you very much. Thanks, Andy. Really appreciate it. Thanks for hosting.
No, thanks.
Hey.
How you doing? Pierce Gordon.
Hey, cheers.